Well, welcome everyone. I'm very excited about the event today. It's the third in our series about Kamishibai and other multimedia, multimodal media. So the first one was Kamishibai and Crankies with Gillian Webster from Australia. And I'm just getting that into the archive now, so you'll be able to see that if you missed it. And then I did one comparing Kamishibai and picture books. And today we have Jesse Gainer, who will be talking about his specialty and something I know very little about. So I'm very excited to hear his presentation as well on cartoneras. And I will just do a little, well, first I should do some announcements about upcoming events. As many of you know, we do a series of dojos or opportunities for people to practice stories they're working on or performing stories that they will want to perform somewhere. So you can do that in front of a very understanding audience who will give you feedback. And the next one is July 25th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. We have one person signed up for that, and I know we usually have room for two or three people. So if you know anyone who's working on something and they want to get feedback, please contact Donna Tamaki. And Donna, if you could put um, your email in the chat for everyone, that would be great. Then we also have one September 26th at 1 p.m. if the 7 p.m. time is difficult for you. We are also doing a whole series of these comparing multimodal media to Kamishibai. And the next one after this will be August 22nd. Mary Sharp from France will share a project she's working on where she's combining puppetry and Kamishibai in really interesting ways. And then that's at 1 p.m. And then Natsu Onoda Power, who's a professor at Northwestern University, will be talking about Kamishibai versus film. And that's at 7 p.m. on October 24th. So I hope all of you can join us for that. So today, I thought, well, I spoke with Jesse about it, and we thought maybe I should start out with a little introduction of why I think this is a topic worth discussing. Jesse and his lovely wife, Nancy, who's with us as well, were our hosts for the 2027 no, 2025 Kamishibai live conference. We traveled to San Marcos and they hosted us and we went to all the schools and met their colleagues and students and it was a lot of fun. And when they invited us to their house, they showed us these incredible Cartonera books. And the more we talked about it, the more I thought it shared certain aspects with a certain kind of Kamishibai. So I'm going to take a moment to share my screen and explain a little bit about that. Okay, so why cartoneras and Kamishibai? Some of you may recognize the picture on the right. It's of a child's Kamishibai from Japan, and I'll speak a little bit more about that. And on the left-hand side, we have a cartonera that Jesse will introduce to us in a moment. Let's see. No, it's not moving forward. Here we go. So in my second book, Performing Kamishibai, I have this diagram that was created by Tsunekatsu Suzuki to talk about all the different forms of Kamishibai. And I think it's really important to understand that Kamishibai isn't just one thing in Japan. Many different forms have emerged over the years to meet different needs. And he divides them into, as you can see, cultural movements. On the right-hand side, we have authority-centered Kamishibai. And the bottom business-centered that are made to make money for in different ways. And on the left-hand side, the creative spirit of the artist. So everybody knows about street performance Kamishibai, and those cards actually were handmade. They were tezukuri in the sense that the artists, they were all painted and shellacked, and they were handmade materials that were disseminated in just a very clever way to make a business out of it. So you can see that that kind of shares the business-centered part of it, but also the creative spirit of the artist part of it. And that has kind of led in some ways to the handmade tezukuri kamishibai cultural movement that I'll talk about in a moment. Then you have educational or instructional kamishibai that are published kamishibai, and of course the propagandistic kamishibai during the war, and certain groups that continue to do propaganda kamishibai today. So to give you a brief timeline, street performance kamishibai came out in the 1930s, and very quickly educational religious published kamishibai really took off. It started a little earlier than this, but really took off in 1935 and onward. And I should point out that Matsunaga Kenya, who was one of the proponents, early proponents of educational kamishibai, actually wrote in his Kamishibai Federation goals the development of a systematic way for children to make kamishibai and through the process of performing their own stories, achieve a comprehensive life education. So very early on in the 1930s, he recognized kamishibai as a way to a really powerful form of educational tool. But this was a little separate from the Tezukuri Kamishibai movement I'll talk about. Um, and then, of course, propaganda Kamishibai from about 1938 till the end of the war. And after 1945, there was the post-revival of educational and street performance Kamishibai. Of course, with television and video games and all the different media that came in the 60s and 70s and the economic, miracle of Japan, there was a very rapid decline in street performance kamishibai in the 1960s and into the 70s. And actually, this is probably lesser known, but in about 1987 on, there were increasing decline in numbers of published educational kamishibai. And we can talk about that more if people have questions. There are lots of reasons for that. And in kind of a response to that, there was a rise of what's called the tezukuri or handmade kamishibai movement. As people saw that children were more and more working with video games and iPhones and not reading as much, volunteers in what are called yomi kikase or read aloud groups would read picture books and make kamishibai in libraries and community centers. So around 1978, Doshinsha published Tezukuri Kamishibai, a book about how to make your own kamishibai. In 1980, there was the first Tezukuri Kamishibai contest. In 87, these volunteers really started to teach children in schools and libraries around Japan. And in 1989, the Mino Tezukuri Kamishibai Festival, which was actually my first introduction to Tezukuri Kamishibai in Japan, started. And they started a contest in 1991. And unfortunately, it folded in, I think, around 23. But that was my first introduction, and then the festival that made me really want to do Tezukuri Kamishibai outside Japan, because there were children from the age of 3 to grandmothers, the age of 83, all sharing their stories with each other, which I just thought was really miraculous. So again, the reasons for this cultural movement were the rise of video games, iPhones, drops in literacy and reading, limited number of topics and audiences covered by published kamishibai. So people really wanted to create other kinds of stories and hear other kinds of voices and appeal to different audiences. And more recently, which we can talk about more later, Japan's strict copyright laws that don't really allow you to perform published kamishibai. So people are having to create their own stories to perform and share videos online. So from 1978 on, there are all kinds of how to create your own kamishibai books came out in Japan. And I guess my book, The Kamishibai Classroom, kind of fits into that genre. So I was really surprised when actually someone wanted to translate it into Japanese, but they felt that I approached it in a different way from a lot of the Japanese authors. But there are many, many volumes since the late 1970s on this topic. And then, as many of you may know, we've had the founders of the Tezukuri Kamishibai Center in Osaka present for us. They started this center in 2020. And really, they wanted to encourage, they actually hold a lot of workshops for children and adults to create their own stories, but they also wanted to find ways to preserve these resources that very often, once they're performed once or children graduate, they just end up in closets. So how do they keep this kind of disseminating these resources? And so they print um, Tezukuri Kamishibai by children and people of all ages, and you can purchase them at their center. But when I was looking at the wonderful books, Cartonera books in Jesse's house, I was thinking that the movement, even though I don't know that much about it, there seemed a lot of correspondences between Kamishibai, this Tezukuri Kamishibai movement, and the Cartonera movement. So I'd like to turn over to him, and he will share with us his presentation so we can all understand this movement better.
Yes, thank you, Tara. That was super interesting. And as you were talking, I was making lots of connections. And hopefully everybody will also pick up on that because I think there's a lot of connections to be made. I loved that graphic that you shared that had the kind of intersections of cultural movement to business centered types of work, and then creative spirit of artists versus authoritarian or authority centered types of work, including propaganda. And I think that there's a lot. We could build something like that with Cartonera books as well. That might be really interesting. But let me share my screen real quick. And while I'm sharing my screen, um, here we go. Okay. Can everybody see that?
Mhm.
Okay. So, well, let me start by saying thank you. Thank you, Tara and Walter and Donna. I'm super excited to present with you here in this forum. Um, It's been super enriching for myself and I know I'm speaking for myself and my wife Nancy, who's here, since we got to know you and see you performing and learning so much about Kamishibai, which is something that we were not very familiar with before we met you. But Cartonera books is something that we know about, and this is something that I'll be talking about. Um, and to see the also wanted to say thank you to all of you who are participating. I was really struck by how international the audience or the participants are, and it's exciting to me, especially in the time period that we're in and sort of the cultural context of where we live, where I live. Um, it's important um, and inspiring to be in a group that represents like multiple countries, multiple continents, and lots of different walks of life in different parts of the world and sharing. Um, so thank you all. This is about Cartonera books, and I put the subheading More Than Arts and Crafts. And if you look at this book that Tara had already showed this picture of this book, and you look at it and just think for a moment about, I mean, what do you think that is? Um, who might have made that? What was the context? What's it about? Um, what is it even? Then I'm not going to ask people to, for the sake of time, it would be a nice discussion to think about and discuss, like, what are your first impressions just by looking at that? But I'm going to talk through it a little bit, and then I hope that we do get a chance to share and ask questions and talk about different ideas together. So that we'll go through here. I'm going to start by giving a brief history. Um, Cartonera books are basically books that are made with recycled or reused cardboard for covers. And the as the story goes, in 2001 in Argentina, there was a severe economic crisis. Um, Not that different from the one that's happening right now. But many people lost their jobs. People were looking for ways to support themselves and their families. And a lot of people um, found that they could collect cardboard that was on the streets where they could find it, just like people collect aluminum and other types of things that can be sold to the recycle centers. Cardboard was something that people would collect. And so you see people, and even to this day, you see people throughout many countries, including countries of Latin America, as large piles of cardboard on carts, pushing the carts, collecting them from the street, and then selling them to recycle plants. And as you might imagine, it's not a super sustainable way to make a living, but if it's the only thing, then it's what you have to do. And so the story goes like this for the Cartonera books. A group of artists in Buenos Aires were walking down the street. They were headed to their studio and they were talking about how they wanted to publish a book of poetry. There really was and artwork, and there just wasn't a medium for doing that. And they were brainstorming ideas as they were headed to the studio. And they were walking down the street. There's a man standing in the street pushing a cart piled high above their heads with cardboard. And one of them looked at the man and he took out some change that he had in his pocket and handed it to the man, like for a handout. And the man looked at them and said, I'm not asking for charity here. And they said, "Oh, I'm sorry." And then the man said, "But I'll sell you some cardboard." So they said, "Great." And so he gave the man the money, and the man gave him some cardboard, and then they continued on their way. So they were talking, holding the cardboard, and they said, "What are we going to do all this cardboard?" And that's when the idea occurred. We could use the cardboard. We can use the cardboard to be the covers for the books that we're going to produce, and we'll make our own books and we'll publish them ourselves because they weren't going to be published through mainstream or um, conventional types of presses. So that was the birth of Eloisa Cartonera, which is a cooperative that still exists today. These in these pictures, you see some of the covers of their books. They're kind of famous for these brightly colored books that are usually the titles of the books that are painted on the cover with kind of a neon kinds of colors of paint. They call it colorinche. And and the idea here was that, they were going to, and they continued to do this. They would buy the cardboard from cartoneros or people who collect the cardboard to sell to recycled centers, and they would pay like up to 5 times more than what the recycled centers would pay for the cardboard. They do this to try to help support people who are struggling to make a living, and then they would use the material to produce and publish their works of art. And it was all different kinds of art, visual art, poetry, short stories, all kinds of things that they were writing, and other people that they started publishing who also weren't necessarily having opportunities to publish in more mainstream or conventional types of ways. That idea was compelling. And as people started to see these books, the word kind of spread, and it spread from country to country. And so, Arsenio, we have a friend here, Ana Valverde, who's from Peru. The second Cartonera press, or the Cartonera, they call it Editorial Cartonera. It's like a cooperative press that produces books out of the cardboard, was Sarita Cartonera in Lima, Peru. And from there, it just kept growing by word of mouth. This was kind of pre-internet. It's really the internet helped to speed it up, but even before that, it was more word of mouth, and then people getting books and trading them and handing and seeing them and seeing the potential, and then another group would pop up, and then in another country, in another country. Today we have hundreds and hundreds of editoriales cartoneras or cartonera presses throughout the Americas. Pretty much every country in the Americas has multiple cartonera presses operating. Mostly people have networked, so they're in communication with each other, and even beyond the Americas, beyond from Argentina all the way up through Canada, but also now there are presses in Europe, many in Spain and Portugal, the Canary Islands. There's presses in Mozambique and other parts of the world as well. So that's a bit of the history. But what exactly is Cartonera Publishing? I've alluded to what it is, and I'm going to go in a little bit more depth now. Um, First of all, it's DIY publishing. It's doing it yourself. It's when the works that you're trying to publish are not being published. Um, take the matters into your own hands and do it yourself. And so, using the cardboard for covers, recycling the or reusing the cardboard that's been discarded or that you can get from people who are collecting cardboard, and then publishing works that aren't being published in conventional ways in commercial presses. The second part is talleres or workshops. The workshops involve bringing people together to make the books. It's a collective experience. The editoriales tend to be cooperatives, but it's also about teaching other people, sometimes along with workshops. And there are something called encuentros or gatherings where people get together to share ideas, to share technique, to share stories. And it's a social and networking type of an opportunity as well as a production of books opportunity. So making books together, sewing the books like you see in this is in my workroom. Walter and Tara and Donna have been there in that space too. So putting the books together, binding them, painting the covers, and then amplifying voices. So if the books aren't getting published in conventional presses, now they're getting published. Everybody, the idea behind Cartonera Publishing is that we all have stories and all of our stories are important, and we're all better when we know each other's stories and we can learn from each other. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. Why cardboard? I think I've already touched on that from the story from Eloisa from Argentina, but kind of to build on that, when you think about it, probably doesn't even matter where in the world you live. Cardboard is ubiquitous. It's like you can't walk down the street without seeing a piece of cardboard discarded or a box in someone's house because they're mail ordering and buying some merchandise and it's coming to their doorstep. Um, Cardboard is everywhere. It transports materials that people buy. So, in the unbridled consumption of our society today, there's a lot of cardboard refuse because what do? You open your cardboard box, you take out the thing, the product, and then you hopefully recycle the cardboard, or sometimes it just gets thrown away. Um, so what was once used to transport commercial products is being reclaimed, reused in the cartonera world to now protect and transport people's stories or people's art. So it becomes cardboard almost becomes a metaphor too for a resistance to the commercialism and the mass consumption, which kind of reminded me of the Tezukuri idea about the importance of um, people making their own stories and then protecting those stories. A term that you hear often in the world or the universe of cartonera books is bibliodiversity. Um, and it's the meaning of the word is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. But when you think about the types of books that get published commercially, while they may seem really vast and broad and all kinds of different topics and all kinds of different authors, the um, the diversity is actually limited because who gets published in commercial presses is a pretty elite kind of a group of people when we really think about it. Oftentimes it's people who have agents or they have certain access to publishing companies and they have a basically a product in terms of the story that or the types of work that they're going to publish or that they write that is considered marketable. And you see that kids as young as 3 years old can make their own stories. They can make books, they can sew them and bind them and then share them. And that's truly multicultural and diverse children's literature by and for children in this case. And while Cartonera books are not exclusively for and by children, I tend to focus on that because I'm have the background in literacy education, and that's where I do most of my work is in preschools and elementary schools. So Gaudencio Galerio is a person who also has a Cartonera press in Santa Maria, Brazil, in the very southernmost part of Brazil. His his cartonera is called Vento Norte, the North Wind, and he always likes to say, "En el universo cartonero no hay fronteras, muros, rejas ni edades." Now Gaudencio is lives in Brazil. He's from Colombia, and he speaks Portuguese and Spanish. This happens to be in Spanish. And what he's saying here is in the universe, the Cartonera universe, there are no borders, there's no walls or bars or ages. And what he's getting at there is that he's getting at bibliodiversity, actually. He's talking about the importance of transcending borders, transcending the boundaries that we have around us to create community, broadly speaking, and learning from each other through stories. And that and there should not be obstacles or barriers. And Cartonetta books hopefully is a way to remove some of the borders or the barriers that do exist from our lives for us to be able to share. There we go. So real quickly, I won't read this all to you because I'm going to go through each of these points just very quickly, mostly with a picture walk to show you some examples. But over the years, working with a multinational group of cartoneras, including Ana, who's here with us, and many other people, Galencio included, we came up with some foundational ideas. A lot of people in the world of cartoneras resist any kinds of concrete, like this is like any kinds of rules, because there are no rules. Um, but but we found that we have some commonalities. We have some things that bring us together. And some of these tenets include access to books, amplifying voices, especially from the margins, the importance of autonomy and self-determination, the community to develop collective and critical consciousness and just sharing our humanity, collaboration, and then democratization of literacy and the desacralization of the book. So let me just talk really quickly about each of those. First, access. And in the case of Cartonera Publishing, the idea of access is not only that books are really expensive, and in some countries, the books are taxed at really high rates as well. And so they're out of reach for working class people and even middle class people to be able to buy a book. And there's not some, I mean, not, we were just talking before this started about the woes that our public libraries are facing right now in the United States. And that's true worldwide, that there's not always access to public libraries. And so access to books, to grow readership, to encourage people to read, is one of the important foundational tenets for why people make cartonetta books. But also it's access to publishing and being an author, so authorship. And so I really love the picture on the right, and it shows and the intensity, both of the actually the one on the left of the kids writing, and they're producing pages for a book that they're going to publish. But the kid on the right is in a preschool in Ude, which is a neighborhood in Lima, Peru, and you can see that he's touching a an illustration of corn that's actually made out of corn kernels. And it says choclo on top in Spanish, but underneath, and his hand is blocking it, it says corn in Quechua. And he's from a community that's a lot of the families actually are from towns in the mountainous region of Peru, and they came into Lima for work, but actually Quechua was their home language. And it's not a language that's really supported in the schools through bilingual education for the most part. And so the parents started making books for the kids in the preschool. So they'd have books, they have access to books, but they also have access to their heritage language. And that was very important. Amplifying voices in the case of Cartonera Publishing is often thinking about voices that are marginalized in our society, in our world, and how important many stories are that don't get out, especially because, like I've said, if I sound like a broken record, but many books don't get published because they're not considered marketable. They're not going to make money for publishers. And so they don't get published. Maybe they seem controversial, but they still are important stories. So cartoon presses or collectives get together and publish those stories that are deemed important to try to amplify those voices that need to be heard. In the case of the book that you see, there's two copies of the same book. It's a sixth finger on every hand by Nasser Rabbah, and it was published by what we call Multinacional Cartonera, and it was a collective of about 10 publishers, including our own, which is Aquifer, and then other ones in Brazil and Colombia and Peru and Spain and Mexico and other countries. And Nasser Rabat is a Palestinian poet who lives in Gaza. And it was during the war when he was had um, written these really powerful poems, and a friend translated them from Arabic to Spanish, and we agreed that we would all work together to format the book, and then we would each print it and produce copies, as many as each Cartonera would press what that was participating was able to produce, that we could get his poetry out there so that people could read it. So we did that and simultaneously published it as a collective that we called Multinacional Cartonera. So that was one example of amplifying voices, especially voices from marginalized or communities or places. Here's another example, Yesenia Montes of Puri Cartonera. She writes books in Quechua. I mentioned Quechua with the book that you saw with the young child reading about corn. Yesenia grew up in Ayacucho. Her family, her heritage language was Quechua. She never heard Quechua in school. She never saw a book in Quechua in her entire experience in school. Everything was in Spanish. When she graduated from the university with a degree in psychology, she really thought about that and she reflected and thought, I think it's damaging for kids to grow up like the way I did and not get to see their language represented in books. There's a certain degree of importance uh, that you recognize as a child when you see something in print. It's permanent. And so she went back home to Ayacucho and she started this organization, and including the Cartonera Press, where she writes books, she gets kids writing books, and in this case it's a children's story based on a popular song in Quechua, but it's in bilingual Spanish and Quechua, so that kids can see their languages represented. Amplifying voices from people who are incarcerated is another line of books that are often published. The one called Desbloqueada or Unblocked or Unlocked is from men who are incarcerated in Jalisco, Mexico. That was published by Sergio Fong, who does writers' workshops in penitentiaries in Jalisco. His cartonera is called La Rueda Cartonera, and that's a book of short stories and memoir that the men wrote who are incarcerated. He's done a whole bunch of really interesting stuff with that. The one on the right, Escribir nos hace libre, writing makes us free, is by La Maga Cartonera. It's Magari Quiros, who lives in Lima, Peru, who does a lot of work in maximum security prisons, doing writers' workshop with women, and then publishing their stories. So these are all parts of amplifying voices that we often don't hear or that we don't see. And of course, we get writing with young children. In this case, these are kids in Texas who are in bilingual education, um, writing books in Spanish, writing books about themselves. You'll remember the title Mi Cultura from the book that was on the cover side of the presentation. One thing I'll point out, it's kind of nice view from this picture. You might recognize the stitching that is often done in Cartonera books that you see on the left-hand side. Um, in Spanish, people call it cosura japonés or
Mhm.
Japanese stitching. And it's a Japanese side stitch. It's a modified one, not as elaborate as sometimes you see, but it's inspired by Japanese style of bookbinding.
Jesse, can I just interrupt you? We have a
Please,
question. Um,
absolutely.
Marcia is asking, are these picture books or writing alone? Seems like just the cover is cardboard, yes?
Yes, so okay, like I said, there's no rules and there's never a definitive one answer to any question, just to forewarn you on that. But yeah, so the books primarily we have the cardboard as the covers, and then inside of the books, and I'll show you in a minute, um, will be made with paper. And those could be handwritten or they could be more mass produced with printed on from computers or typewriters, whatever the people have access to who are making the books. Um, there have been some people who have made board books, which are entirely cardboard, um, and but primarily and most common, you'll find books that have the cardboard is being used for the covers, and then the inserts on the inside will have the text of the book on regular paper. And I'll show you in a minute where the cover art can be different on each book, and then the inside part would be the same book. But I'll explain that one in just a sec. So here it is. Perfect timing. Autonomy is another tenet that refers to the fact that each Cartonera press has complete autonomy to publish what they want in the form that they want and how they want to do it. Um, I put this picture as an example because you can see that there's multiple copies of a book here. This is ones that Nancy and I published through Aquifer Cartonera. The author of this particular title, the title is Bottle of Spit. Each of these represent the exact same book. So if you were to open up each of these books, on the inside, you'll find a collection of short stories. They're kind of urban legends that our friend Diana Garcia, who Tara and Walter and Donna know, because Diana was a first grade teacher. She just retired, bilingual teacher, and she did Kamishibai in her classroom with her kids and had her kids making Kamishibai stories. But she also does other types of writing, and she wrote these stories that she learned from her godmother growing up in the West Side, San Antonio, in Texas. And it's a collection of 5 short stories. In each of these books, you'll find the same story that was printed and copied, reproduced, I should say. We made about 150 copies of this book, but no two copies have the same cover. So what we did when you saw that picture of the people coming together for the workshop is we bound the books and we painted, and everybody just painted what they wanted to paint on the cover. And so here's an example of what not 10 of the books out of the 150 that we produced of Diana's work.
So, Jesse, we have a couple more questions.
Sure.
Oh, and I think Marcia wanted to know if they're also illustrated on the inside, not
Ah,
on the
yeah.
outside. Hmm.
Yes, so some of them are and some of them aren't. So like it kind of just depends on what the book is. So the kids' books tend to be picture books, like those young children's books, written by or for the children. In the case of the book that you're looking at right now, Bottle of Spit, it's 5 short stories, but the title of page for each of the stories has an illustration. So it's a combination. It has pictures and text.
And Stella wanted to know what happens when these books are published, in quotes.
Yes.
Are they published using recycled cardboard or some of the books standalone ones?
I'm not sure I understand the standalone part.
Like only one of them, I think.
Oh, are they okay? So are they like mass produced or multiple copies or just one? So both, yes, to both of those things. Sometimes, especially in classrooms where a kid will write a book, oftentimes that would be a standalone book. It'll have the cardboard covers, and the kid will make the whole book and bind it. Like that 3-year-old that you saw sewing the book together, that was like a one-off book. There's also books that people call object books or art books that are oftentimes just one book is produced. But in the case of a book like this one, Bottle of Spit, we did 150 copies. So there was multiples. Sometimes with child-produced books, and I'll show you an example of that in just a bit, um, there are multiple copies made. It just depends on the um, individual context for that story and how it's being written and produced. I hope that answers the question.
Anna was wondering, and you talked about this a little bit, but how are they bound? It's a Japanese, like a variation on a Japanese
Oh,
type binding.
yeah. So, do you see the girl in this picture, her book that says Mi Cultura? And you see that this one happens to be using ribbon, but in this case, there were s- uh, with an awl. The pages of the book are inside the cardboard. The It's all clipped together, usually with like a clothespin or another type of a clip, alligator clip, and then you use an awl to make the holes. If you're making many copies, you could use a cordless drill. But make in this case, she had 5 holes along the spine side of the book, and then it's sewed. In this one, it's with ribbon. Usually, it's done with string.
Marcia says, this is a wonderful presentation. I can't see it. There is a genre or discipline in the visual arts called artists' books. These would qualify as such. It can be a one of a kind or an addition. Many colleges and museums and private collections with an interest in collecting these kinds of books. You should even contact Printed Matter in New York City, special collections in libraries, museums, etc.
Thank you. Yeah, that's super interesting. The University of Wisconsin in Madison has a collection of Cartonera books. It's the largest collection in the world, which is it's ironic and kind of funny, but it's also great because they have like 1,000 or more copies of Cartonera books from throughout Latin America. They even have one of the books that Anna and I wrote. But and they're in the special collection at the library. The University of Texas Benson Latin American collection, Lilas Benson, has not as large of a collection, but they also have a collection in their special collections. And the reason I said it was kind of funny and is because when you think about the importance of access that Cartonera publishers put on their books, and then they go to if they end up in a special collection, the access becomes limited, not because people aren't allowed to go, but because they're locked up in, you have to request you have to know they're there, and you have to get to the university library, and then you have to request the specific book, and then they take them out, and you have to go into the special room with no pens and papers or anything, so that you can look at them like because they're treasures, which I think is really cool. I mean, in Lilas Benson, we've been in there where they took out actual codices or codexes from pre-Columbian times, and then Cartonera books, and we're looking at them all together. Because they're truly treasures. But also, we want people to get them in their hands and read them, like the boy on the right is reading his book. But yeah. Um, can I keep going? I'm almost there. So then, going to again with the access with this book here, I like because I work with kids. I often like to bring this book and show them, and I say, "What do you think this book is about, kids?" And you might imagine that they'll say it's about a cat playing with yarn, which seems like a great prediction. And kids are often taught in school to use context and look at the title and look at the cover. Of course, this book, they might say, why isn't there a title on the cover? And that's what people often say. And so I wanted to show that one, and I like to show this one. Um, this is actually a book of poetry in Nahuatl, which is an indigenous language in Mexico, and it's bilingual, so it's also in Spanish. And the way that this book was produced by Cartonera in Cuernavaca, Mexico, is that every Saturday people come together at a cultural center called La Casona Spencer. It's in the heart of the old part of Cuernavaca. And they have pan dulce, like sweet bread and coffee and paint. And they'll have the books all that they're working on, having just bound them, and people paint. and people can paint whatever they want on the covers. And when I asked Nayeli Sanchez, who's one of the people who runs the editorial or the press, well, how do people know what the book is if it doesn't have any indication on the cover? She said they open it, and then you can read the title and you can read it. And so she said, but what's interesting, or what they really liked about their style of doing this, is that for in the case of this book, Arco Iris de la Palabra, or The Rainbow of the Word, it's a book of poetry. There was 250 copies of this book made. You can see that it's on paper. You can see it was printed. Um, but there's only one that has a cat with a balls of yarn. Um, each book is an individual and unique piece of art on the cover, whether it has the title or not. And then it's also the book that's inside of it. So that was something that I learned from Nayeli at La Cartonera. Um, Finally, the democratization of literacy and the desacralization of the book. And I apologize, I'm talking so fast, but I really wanted to kind of get through this part so I could show you another example and then have conversation. Um, in this book here, you see a book that was also has that side stitch that I had mentioned, with this one with string. This is a book by a 5-year-old child in Texas. It's called Ghost Mountain. He dictated the story to his mother, and it was about a mother and a kid who were hiking in the woods, and they were climbing Ghost Mountain, and they had to get away from demons that were on Ghost Mountain. So you imagine it's a fantasy type of a book, but it was based on the hikes that he would do with his mom and his imagination, that he would create these stories each time that they would go hiking. And then his mom said, "You should make that into a book." And he did. And then we published it. Um, one of the things I love about this book is that halfway through, after he finishes the fantasy story about Ghost Mountain, he goes into part two, which is expository text that he created, or nonfiction about ghosts and what they eat. And it's like a regular nonfiction book about ghosts and how they eat people with lava, marshmallow sauce, and he explains it all very well. But the idea here of democratization of literacy, and I've been talking about this, but I wanted to be explicit, is that we all have important stories, and we can democratize not just who has access to read books, but also who are the authors of books, and um, and so who can publish a book and be an author of a book. The idea of desacralization of the book, when you looked at that first book and I said, think about what that is, and it said Mi Cultura and it was on the cover, it's possible that you thought, is that actually a book? I mean, I know he said it was cartoon a book, so it must be a book, but it doesn't look like a book. Or you look at this and you think that doesn't look like a book, not like a book but what I'm used to, that was produced in a factory. Um, that we buy in a bookstore or see in a public library, typically. And the idea here is that when you look at this, it causes a bit of disequilibrium. Wait, is it a book or is it not a book? Wait, a 5-year-old made that book? He wrote that story? I could write a book. I could write a story and I could publish a book. And so that takes the idea of the book writing and the publishing of a book, so not just publishing in quotes, but actually publishing a book in down from the pedestal, from the elite, and putting it in the hands of all of us, that we can all DIY publish our own stories and actually share them. In the case of this, I can't think of anything more real in terms of publishing the book. When this book was produced, it was in English and Spanish, and this you just see Ghost Mountain, but it was La Montaña de los Fantasmas, and it had the text in both English and Spanish. Some friends in Bogota, Colombia, Amapola Cartonera, said, "Can we want to do a Zoom, and would the author come and share the book?" She's like, "He's 5, and I'll have to ask his mom." And she said yes. And so they organized a Zoom, and people from multiple countries came, and Luca, the boy who wrote the book, his grandparents were there. Um, And before they invited Luca to share his book and how he made it, an art professor from the university in Colombia, in Bogota, started doing this very academic discussion of his artwork because this is a picture book. He drew the pictures and then he dictated the story to his mom, who wrote the words. And I mean, I never forget the expression on his grandparents' face because I was watching them on the Zoom and their eyes were like bulging and they had big smiles on their face because their grandson, who was 5, had published this book, and this art professor was talking about it in really like academic terms, but like very complimentary ways. And actually, after we published this book, Luca went to school and shared it with his kindergarten class, and his teacher put him on the author's chair, and he read the book to the class, and he became known as the author. So he's like kind of an internationally famous author at 5. So that kind of takes that. Here's another example of this is a transnational book exchange. Anna was part of this, where we did flora and fauna, sorry, of our communities. A group of kids in Lima, Peru, a group of kids in San Marcos, Texas, sharing and learning about each other over Zoom conversations, and then writing a book together about the flora and fauna of their respective communities and learning about each other's lives. Um, you can we honestly these tenants, any one of these books could have encompassed all of the tenants, but I wanted to share multiple examples, so I'm going through each tenant. But you might find some, hey, wait, community. We've talked about community when you got a group of kids from Peru and Texas together, but so each of these tenants we could have used just one book to discuss all of these tenants. Hopefully, this is interesting to see other different examples. Here's a really beautiful book called We Are Community. It's by a group of kids who collectively wrote the book. They're all elementary school age. They live in a place called Las Lomas de Chahuaní. It's in Puente Piedra, which is on the outskirts of Lima, Peru. And they are a part of a cartonera that's called um, Sancho Cartonera because it's part of a community center called Quixote para la Vida. So it's like a Don Quixote reference there. But it's a very, very low income, high needs community. And the kids wrote this book. They were learning about solidarity and working together. And they wrote this about their neighborhood. And it's a fictional story, but it talks about how when they work together, they can accomplish things. And that was actually the dedication that the kids wrote in the book, which is and it's written on the bottom. This book is dedicated to the community of Las Lomas de Chahuaní. Um, that when we work together can accomplish anything we put our minds to. And so um, this is another really beautiful example, working with a group of men in a maximum security prison in Argentina. Um, their kids, um, they wanted to have a part in their children's lives. Many of them had kids. And so what with a group of people we did was um, they worked with them to get their kids to write stories, and then the men would edit the stories. And then so together, the kids with their dads were able to publish a book of children's stories by the children. And this book actually was reproduced and spread and given out to schools in the area in Bogota. I mean, I'm sorry, in Buenos Aires, outside of Buenos Aires, Argentina. This is another example that Ana will remember. It was a group of kids in Yauyos, Peru, and a group in San Marcos, kindergarten in this case, and it's called One Day in the Life or One Day in My Life. And it's a collective book where kids work together. Each kid did a page with a picture and then some text where they told a little bit about themselves and typical things that they do at school, typical things they do with their families, typical things they do in their community. And then we shared them across borders so the kids could learn about each other. And finally, to conclude, I want to share a book that I wrote that is called Giant Ants Attack the Little HEB. And I'll give you a little context for that. Um, the The book was inspired by um, movies that I used to like to watch on TV when I was a kid. They were books from the 1950s, like horror movies, like The Blob. Some of you might remember that. Um, and they would always come on TV on Saturdays, and so that's what I like to watch. I think one of the Fly was another one, and Them was the one with the giant ants that attacked a city, and that was the one that inspired this particular book. But one thing I really liked about them, they were horror movies, but they weren't scary at all because the special effects were um, kind of so bad that it never looked very realistic. So I tried to nod to the movies and specifically to the movie Them when I created this book. Um, my friends and I used to play that constantly in the neighborhood, kind of the way Luca, the kid who made Ghost Mountain, would play um, Ghost Mountain when he went hiking with his mom. My friends and I would play Them, and there was always giant ants attacking our town, and we always had to save the town. And that's where this book was born. It's called Giant Ants Attack the HEB. You'll see the binding here. It's just string, but with the 5 holes and then stitched together. So I tried to get some of the aesthetic of like a old movie poster. So I'm going to read this one to you. This is the title page. Giant ants attack the little HEB. I should tell you that if you're not from Texas, you may not be familiar with HEB, but it's the most beloved grocery store. I've never lived, I've lived in multiple states, but I've never lived in a place where people were so had so much allegiance and love for the grocery store. But HEB does a lot for our community. It supports a lot of education. But more than that, it really tries to tailor what they have in the grocery store for the community. So they really know the community. And so they'll have the things that they sell that people love based on cultural aspects, I guess, of the people who live there. But in our town, San Marcos, Texas is a small town in Texas. We have two HEBs. One is the big HEB and one is the little HEB. One is bigger. We always go to the little one because one, it's closer, and two, it's easier to park because it's littler and not as many people go there. Um, so this is a story called Giant Ants Attack the Little HEB. And what you can't see here, this is something that, you um, um, Tara, when you were talking about the Kamishibai in Japan, something that really struck me was when you said that they had copyright laws that were really strict and didn't allow for people to sometimes perform other stories. And so people had to start writing their own. And I thought that was a really neat connection here. This is really common in Cartonera books, is to write a copy left instead of a copyright. And this particular one, I'm got some of the idea from my friend Sergio Fong, who did one of the books that I shared earlier. He's in Guadalajara and he does the writing with incarcerated people in penitentiaries there. And he often puts something like this in his books. So it says, "It is strictly prohibited to prohibit the reproduction of this book as long as you give credit to the author, you're kind to animals, and you look out for bicycles when you're driving." So that's the copy. That's the only condition. But otherwise, you could copy it. We hope you will copy it, and make your own stories too. So here's how it goes. It was an ordinary day in San Marcos, Texas, and I tried to collage here to reproduce some of that grade B kind of movie special effects, but also to be able to incorporate actual photographs from the town, which kids get a kick out of when you live in a small town and they see, like when I show this book, a lot of times kids will point out, my uncle works at that barber shop and things like that. Wait, something's not normal at all. Giant ants are attacking. See, there's the barber shop. Mo better cuts. They're attacking the little HEB. These nightmare creatures are so horrible, so terrifying, so hideous. Panic ensued in the aisles of the grocery store. People ran in every direction. It was a fear-frenzied moment of suspense. Luckily, some courageous children congregated in aisle 9. The oldest one said, Unless we do something, and quick, San Marcos will be destroyed. In a matter of hours. The youngest asked, should we get a charcoal lighter fluid on aisle 10? We could light 'em up and take care of those ants fast. No, we can't take that risk. It might burn down the whole store. I've got an idea. Sugar. Ants love sugar. We can lure them away with it. They got all the sugar they could carry and ran toward the ants. Come on, you nightmare creatures. Don't you want a delicious snack? The kids trailed the sugar out the front of the grocery store. You can see the sugar going out front. They trailed the sugar down Hopkins Street and through the square.
Mhm.
They went down past Texas State University. That's where Nancy and I work. They trailed the sugar all the way to Sewell Park, and the ants followed. They trailed the sugar right to the edge of the San Marcos River, and San Marcos is known as the mermaid capital of the world, so there's mermaids sprinkled throughout the book. And the current swept the ants downstream. The ants washed over the waterfall at Children's Park and out of San Marcos forever. Everyone in town was so happy. They had a parade to honor the heroic children who saved San Marcos from the giant ants. And that's the end of the story. I like when I read this in San Marcos to kids, they recognize the scenery, they recognize the names of the streets and the parks, and they recognize that the kids are the protagonists. The kids have agency and they're the ones that save the town. Oh, and I see Carl Castro is here, and that's perfect timing. Oops. Because I'm going to just share my screen really quickly to close. Um, because the last slide that I want to show you is a slide that Carol, who's here with us today from Ucumari, the other half from Ana Valverde and Carol Castro, who have Ucumari Cartonera, and they're in Lima, Peru. Carol has made this beautiful boutai. They both know Pepe Cabañas in Lima, and they know about Kamishibai, and there's some synergy there. And I know that Tara has written about and given directions for making cardboard boutais, and Carol has made one. And here's a story this functions as a Kamishibai story. So in addition to doing Cartonera books, Carol and Anna also have done lots of different forms of storytelling with kids in schools and in community spaces. And with that, I'm going to close and say thank you. I hope that it was something in there that was interesting for you. And I want to pass it to Tara, who's going to share a story.
That was great, Jesse. Thank you so
Thank you.
much. There were just so many things resonating with what you said and different aspects of Kamishibai. And I think we have a lot to learn from each other in the ways that we can build community, because I think a lot of those community projects would also work wonderfully with Kamishibai as well. I also thought it was interesting. I hadn't thought about it before, but that Kamishibai was really born out of economic need also, and the whatever materials were to hand, for them to recreate this kind of movie experience in miniature form for children on the margins who didn't have access to go to films, or so that is also very similar. And yeah, I think you just did a beautiful job of covering all the different reasons and motivations that are also similar, like just giving voice to people who might not otherwise be able to be published. I have mentioned that publishers in Japan increasingly are having to, market for younger and younger children. And this has been a sad thing for Kamishibai because, as some of you may know, during the war, 70% of the Kamishibai created were for adults. So it's not that the format cannot be created for adults, it just is increasingly not being. And I thought it was also interesting the way you showed the multiple editions of things so that each child could have their own book, because that's one of the aspects that some of the Kamishibai artists I've talked to have mentioned has really led to the decline of Kamishibai in the schools, because you only need one Kamishibai to entertain a lot of people and share across classrooms. But with picture books, they tend to buy, one maybe for each child in the class, so they can sell a lot more picture books. So all of these things have really led to making it very difficult to publish Kamishibai in Japan today. It's a real struggle to sell them. And as I said, that's led in a lot of ways to the rise of tezukuri, because if people want to teach about something specific or tell children stories about their local communities or have grandparents talk about their memoirs, the best thing is to just make your own. Um, so I wanted to share a story. Jesse asked me to share a Kamishibai story because that's sort of been the pattern with these events to look at both formats. And this one, all my stories are tezukuri. So this one I thought I would share for a couple of reasons. One is that with tezukuri, you don't have to meet the requirements of a published story, which typically, like with picture books, have a set number of cards. So now they're sometimes as short as 8, 12, or 16. And also, because of the cost involved, there are very few shikake or movable cards anymore. If you look at collections, like the Kotsen collection has a lot of wonderful examples of shikake or movable Kamishibai cards from the war period when it became popular to do that. So publishers could publish them, but it's expensive and they're easily destroyed. So I enjoy adding shikake to my stories, and I use quite a few here. Also, this is a story that comes from my own background. And that was one of the things that I loved. I can't remember exactly who said it. I think it was in the Australian video that we did that's archived, but someone talked about bespoke Kamishibai, Kamishibai that you make for a specific occasion. And for me, this story is very meaningful because my mother was from Norway, and she was a child during the Nazi occupation. And she brought back, she brought to this country all of her nisse. So I'll show you the title page of the story. Like, see if I can set this up so you can see it. And I guess I better spotlight myself um, so people can see it. But nisse are little trolls that protect the family and the homeland, the home. So they were very important during the war. Um, let's see, how do I pin myself for everybody? Here we go. Um, and they were actually thought to protect the farm animals. And my mother's home was actually occupied by the Nazis, so she was moved into a small apartment they had to share with other people. So I think these little nisse were very important to her symbolically. And also that comes up in the story, the kubastolen, or the Norwegian traditional carved chairs that are hollow. So people use them during the war to hide things. And the Nazis understood that, so they destroyed a lot of them. So she actually she brought to America a Kubastulen as well. So that comes up in this story. I hope you can all see that. There is no such thing as a Nissa. Story and Pictures by Tara McGowan. Now, in Norway, a long time ago, and sometimes even today, there are these little trolls named Nisse. The Nisse takes care of the home and the animals, and in exchange for that, each Christmas, on Christmas Eve, the owner of the farm gives the Nisse a big bowl of steaming hot rice pudding with lots of butter on it. Now, if there's not enough butter on it, the Nisse have been known to play pranks. Long ago in Norway, there lived a farmer named Olav. Olav lived by himself, and after a long day hard at work, he would come home, and since he had no one else to talk to, he would talk to himself. There is no such thing as a Nisse, he said. I don't need any little red-hatted elf to take care of my farm. I can take care of it myself. Now look at this Kubbestuhlen, this carved Kubbestuhlen my grandfather made. He knew a lot about Nissa and told lots of stories about them, and I used to believe them when I was a boy, but not anymore. There's no such thing as a Nissa. Did you hear that? Something's going on. Must be a mouse. Anyway, where was I? Oh, yes, there's no such thing as a Nissa. Well, because Farmer Olaf didn't believe in Nissa, of course he didn't make the rice pudding on Christmas Eve. And so the little Nissa in Olaf's house had to make his own. Now, when Nissa don't want to be seen, they have gray hats. Can you see that little gray hat over there? He's hiding behind the potatoes. Oh, there it is again. Now he's hiding behind the rice. If you listen very carefully, you can hear him. Oh, you take the rice and put it in the pot and put lots of milk in and let it come to a boil. And when it's all nice and soft, you put lots of sugar and cinnamon and butter. And when he was done, Ulan says he was called jumped down with his bowl of steaming hot rice porridge, and he went out to the barn to eat it. But the next morning, what happened to my kitchen? It's a disaster. Was it you? Was it you? Was it you? What? Did I hear someone say it was a Nissa? There's no such thing as a Nissa. It must be a mouse. Maybe many mice. And the only way to kill mice is to get a cat. And so that very day, Olaf went to the next farm and he brought home a cat. There you go, Leo, he said. You better be like the lion you're named after and get all the mice. Ah, said Leo. He was ready. But who did he meet? Not a mouse, but Ulanissa. And Ulanissa made him a big bowl of steaming hot porridge with lots of butter, and very soon they were good friends. But the next day, oh, you bad cat! How dare you mess up my kitchen again? Get out to the barn! Olaf was furious. When they got to the barn, Ulanissa was taking care of his horse, Hilda, his favorite horse on the farm. Oh, Leo, he said, you mustn't let Farmer Olaf get to you. He's grouchy, but he really has a good heart. Now, where are my manners? I want to show you the farm. As soon as I've finished taking care of Hilda here, the horse, I'll take you around to see everything. That evening, they went up on the hillside and looked out over the northern lights. Isn't it beautiful? Said Ulanissa. This is the most beautiful farm in all of Norway. Maybe in the whole world. Meow, said Leo. said Hilda. But what the three friends didn't know was the farm was in trouble. Farmer Olav had borrowed lots of money when there were bad years, and finally, this year, he had sold lots of milk and cheese and had been able to make the money back. I'll just hide it in the Kubastool in here, he said. This way, I'll take it to the bank tomorrow and pay back all my debts, and I'll save the farm. But what Farmer Olav didn't know is that two sets of eyes were watching him. Two bad men had followed him from town and seen all the money he had made, and they were ready to take it. Did you hear what the old man said? Why, he's going to take it to the bank tomorrow. We better make sure we make our move tonight. Yeah, but didn't you also say that that money's going to save his farm? Don't you feel bad taking his farm from the old man? Ha! He's so old he shouldn't have a farm and manage it all by himself. We'll be doing him a favor by taking it away. What they didn't know was in the next field, watching the same sunset, was Ulanissa, Leo the cat, and Hilda the horse. Did you hear that? said Ulanissa. We better go back to the farm and protect it. I have a plan. That night, as the moon rose over the farmhouse and Farmer Olav was fast asleep, two shady characters approached the house. As they came to the door, they carefully opened it and stepped inside. Suddenly, they were scratched. Hey, someone's coming after us with knives! Help! Help! As they ran toward the door, kapow! Hilda was there ready. Ow, ow, now they're after us with clubs. Help, I can't move. Something's wrapping around my legs, my arms. Help, help, help. They made so much noise that finally Farmer Olaf came in and turned on the light. And what did he see? Two robbers, all tied up with rope, and on top of them, Anissa. Oh my goodness, he said. My grandfather was right. There really is such a thing as a Nissa. Meow, said Leo, said Hilda. And so, from that day forth, Farmer Olav believed in Nissa. And every time Christmas rolled around on Christmas Eve, he made a big bowl of steaming hot rice porridge for Ula Nissa, for Leo the cat, and Hilda the horse. And they all lived happily ever after. Snip, snap, snooter, no är äventyr ut. That is the end of the story. Okay. Let's see how I unspot myself. Let's see. Remove spotlight. So anyway, I gave myself a lot of liberties with that story to make all kinds of movement and to remember my mother. And it's a story that obviously is not to be found in other places. So I'd like to open the conversation, and you can raise your hand, or I think there are probably some messages in the chat as well. Um, yeah, thank you, everyone. Um, yeah, so I see a lot of correspondences that Jesse and I talked about in terms of, not having to meet the demands of publishers and the various kinds of gatekeepers that keep literacy in a certain format is certainly true for Kamishibai as well. But do any of the rest of you have questions or ideas from what Jesse talked about today? Bob, why don't you unmute and tell us what you're thinking?
Okay. Yeah, I think I'm on screen now. Hey, so yeah, I came a little late. Thank you very much for the well-prepared presentation. And I got in there at a part where a lot of this is the children are making books, and it reminded me of some of the Waldorf school principles where students are watching what the teacher makes on the board and then draw their own pictures and keep their own books. And these are quite, if you haven't been into a Waldorf school and see what the students create, it's quite impressive. And so it kind of reminds me of the agency that kids have there to make their own textbooks, so to speak, or their own books, along with, I'm just beginning to understand what your presentation was about. So I thought that was a great connection that I made. And the second thing I wanted to comment on, as an educator, I've done a lot of bookmaking with kids, and I love the idea of them sewing it and binding it that way. It even makes it more, I don't know, more not just personal, but just more connected to the human person, not instead of staples. So those are my two comments. Thank you very much. It was quite inspiring. And Tara, also, thank you for your presentation. Love your illustration. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. I had a question. I think Annette was asking about the moving eyes. And that's something actually, let me find a card, which you have the freedom to do with Tezukuri more than with publish now, you really have to limit it in terms of card number. Let me find an example of the moving eyes one. Um, so I actually have two cards, and on one of them, it just has the eyes. So I just put them at the right place so I could move them back and forth. And this is rather interactive, so it's hard to perform on Zoom because I like to have the kids like tell me, who it was that made the mess and things like that. But yeah, I mean, you really feel like he's looking at you if you're in an audience. Um, yeah, so I think that in terms of the different kinds of shikake, um, that is something that in the war period they actually had a lot of, and I've used this in other stories, sort of partial cards that were inserted or different parts of the card that was inserted that you could pull out. And it's pretty amazing that a lot of those are still preserved in collections because they are so ephemeral. And one of the questions I'd like to maybe bring up with people, I know we've touched on it a little bit. Marcia was talking about different collections that hold these materials. But I think more and more now that tezukuri has been around, at least in Japan, since the late 1970s, there's more concern about, losing these materials and how to preserve them. So that's something that the Tezukuri Kamishibai Center, the handmade Kamishibai Center, is trying to do. And we also had another group called Pachi Pachi Kobo, who are trying to publish in small editions the Tezukuri Kamishibai that people are developing.
There's also, just to tie that to the Cartonera books, and Carl and Ana, who are here and they work in Lima, Peru, and live in Lima, Peru, working with teachers. They work with a couple of schools in Lima who have created Cartonera book libraries. That
Hmm.
are books that are made not only by the teachers and the kids of the school, but even books that other people have made. And so they're ha keeping collections in the libraries that the kids and parents and teachers have access to those books. And then the book that I shared that was about the community that was from Las Lomas de Chahuaní in Puente Piedra, from Sancho Cartonera. They've created a community library up in that town in that neighborhood because it's really remote. Like you have to go up the side of a mountain to get there. It's not easy to get up and it's not easy to get down. So they took a small structure that was there, and the some of the moms of kids that live in the neighborhood kind of manage the library, and it's almost all Cartonera books that were made by them, uh,
Hmm.
people there. So it's
That's
one
a
way that
great
we're
idea.
preserving.
Yeah, I was actually thinking, the story of the Great Ant Attack from 50s television shows is directly out of street performance Kamishibai. So it would make a great Kamishibai story too. Um, and interestingly, I think that there's been such an effort to give Kamishibai, because it started as street performance art and people tend to look down on it as, not very high culture. There's been an effort in the Kamishibai community to really elevate it. And then there's been backlash against that by the Tezukuri Heme Kamishibai. So I think I mentioned this to Jesse, but there was actually a group that started to make grade B movies. They call them grade B Kamishibai. And I was talking to one of the women involved with that movement because I thought it was so fun. I mean, they were very funny and kind of not very reverential if anything. And she said that they were actually, after 3 years, kind of shut down by everybody saying, you mustn't make fun of Kamishibai. We have to elevate the art form and all of this. So it can be difficult. Yeah, well, I just realized we're almost out of time. It's almost 8:30, and I want to thank Jesse for the wonderful. I feel like now I really understand so much more about Cartonera, so thank you. And thank you all for coming. And I hope that you'll sign up for our dojos. We need someone, we could have one more person for July 25th. And I put the dates in the chat, but that one's at 7 p.m. Eastern time. And the next one after that will be September 26th at 1 p.m. if the 7 p.m. time doesn't work. And then we'll also have are next in this series on puppetry and Kamishibai in August. So I hope you can join us for that. Thank you all.
Was
And
wonderful. It was just wonderful.
great.
Both
Yeah.
presentations complemented each other and just it was just so endearing. That's the only word I can think of. The kids' work and your work, a lot to think about. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Marcia. And I will save the chat and share it with Jesse because I know there are lots of other great comments in there. So again, thank you all for coming and hope to see you soon.
Thanks a
Bye.
lot. I put my email in case if anyone is interested and wants to talk more or wants to learn about how to start your own cartonera. That's one of the tenets is the collaboration and community. So I will be more than happy to help you to work on that if you'd like. So my
Thank,
email's in there.
thank you very much.
Yeah, I love that. And that also, there's a lot of correspondence there, I think, with Kamishibai as well. I will save the chat again since we've had a few more comments since then. And I hope you all take down Jesse's email and get in touch. So thanks again and goodbye, everyone. Good night.
Thank you.